am retired city manager of San Antonio, but also currently professor in public service in the public administration graduate program at St. Mary's. When Gabriel asked me to do the introduction of Henry Cisneros, I said, well, how much time do I have? And he said, you've got 2 minutes. And I said, 2 minutes? You can't introduce Henry Cisneros in 2 minutes. And I thought, well, maybe I can take a stab at this. Henry and I have so much in common. We both grew up on Monterey Street, a few blocks apart on the west side. We both went to Central Catholic High School. When he was a senior at Texas A&M and commander of the Fighting Texas Aggie Band, I might add, I was a freshman at A&M. He's married to Mary Alice Cisneros, formerly Mary Alice Pettis. Well, Mary Alice Pettis and I were classmates at Sacred Heart for 8 years in elementary school. And finally, Henry and I spent about 12 years together at City Hall. He as mayor and council member, and me as assistant city manager at that time. So we have a lot in common, and so I thought about, okay, I could do the normal bio introduction. You know, you go down the list of where they went to school, where they worked, and all that. I could do that, but I won't. I could talk about how he graduated from A&M in '68 and then got a master's degree there, and then went on to Harvard and got a master's degree there too, and then got a doctorate in public administration at George Washington University, but I'm not going to get into that. I could talk about how he was elected to the city council in 1975 as a member of the Good Government League ticket. Now, the Good Government League was a very powerful group and really ran municipal government in San Antonio for many years. They were elected 9 council members, elected at large, and they selected their mayor from among them. And Henry was involved in that first term on the council, working on trying to change the way we elect our elected officials here in San Antonio due to the Voting Rights Act. And at that time, we, in 1977, had a charter amendment led by Henry, among others, that said, you know, we're going to go from 9 at-large council members to 10 council members elected by districts and the mayor elected at large. In '77, after that first election, he was elected to represent District 1. We're sitting in District 1 now, the central city and the downtown area. He served for 4 years as a council member, and in 1981 ran for the position of mayor. He was elected in 1981 and became mayor for 8 years, I guess it was, from 1981 to 1989. And, you know, I could talk a lot about what he did as mayor. You know, he built bridges among various groups, the poor and the rich, and developers and environmentalists, activists and the establishment. In fact, I remember in 1983, we included the bond issue, a Saunders drainage project. Now, we both grew up in that area, and we knew that when it rained, it was time to put on your swim trunks and go swimming in the street. But the Saunders drainage project, you know, fixed that. And I could talk about how he energized economic development, a huge thing that he did in terms of providing better jobs and better quality of life after that for our citizens, recruiting businesses and corporations, moving forward in international relations with sister cities all over the country, and then the visitor industry as well. He brought in SeaWorld, the Fiesta Texas, and ultimately the Alamo Dome. And I guess, you know, I really could talk about when he was moved up to Secretary of HUD in the President Clinton administration. And I could talk about how his focus was on affordable housing, home ownership, the homeless, inner city revitalization, and did a lot more that had been done at HUD in the past. And I could also mention that after that, he became a businessman. He was involved in, and still is, the chairman of City Vista. Lately, he's become a partner in the investment banking firm of Siebert, Cisneros, and Schenck. And they do investment banking in local government all over the country. And I could talk about, he's still involved in multiple community endeavors. You know, he's been chairman of 2 different chambers of commerce, the Greater Chamber and the Hispanic Chamber, involved in founding American Sunrise, which does a lot of good in our community. Most recently, tri-chair, one of the tri-chairs of the San Antonio Connect, which is talking about, you know, the need for looking at transportation alternatives like mass transit in our community. In fact, speaking of mass transit, I could mention that back in 2016, 2015, when I was chairman of VIA, and we were pushing the streetcar project for downtown, which incidentally would have gone right outside the door here. You could have parked someplace else and just run the streetcar here, but that died. I was giving a speech to 100 business leaders at the Barn Door restaurant, and Henry and I, and maybe a couple others, were the only Latinos in the room out of 100 business leaders. And of course, they were all very negative about the streetcar. Several of them were owners of auto dealerships, so of course, they're going to be negative about mass transit. And Henry was the only one who stood up and said, you know, I know Alex, and if he's going to be working this project, he's going to do a good job. So he provided esquina. He was a backup and helped me out. And I could share all of these things with you, but I won't. I want to mention 3 special things about Henry. Number 1, he wouldn't be here. In fact, neither of us would be here today if today's immigration policies were in place in the 1920s, when our mothers came here from Mexico. Number 2, thousands of people see Henry as a role model, a mentor, a leader, and a friend. And number 3 is his undying commitment to San Antonio. He's had countless career opportunities all over the country, but he always comes back. And a special dedication to the West Side, where he grew up and where he still lives. All these things I could have said, but I won't. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Henry Cisneros.
Thank you, Alex. I'm so glad you restrained yourself because you would have gone over the 2 minutes. Let me just say, I could tell you for a long time about Alex's degrees and the contributions he made to San Antonio as one of the longest serving city managers, a very effective city manager, but I won't either. I just will tell you this. I've known Alex since Mary Alice and he were in about the 7th or 8th grade at a parochial school, Sacred Heart, on the West Side. And since that era, in every sector he has been, people just had one nickname for Alex, and that was the brain. He was the smartest in his class, the smartest in college and graduate school, and one of the smartest leaders our city has ever had. Alex, thank you very much for your service. I've been asked to say just a few remarks before we begin the panel. The most important thing is to hear from the members of the panel. Let me just thank St. Mary's Law School, particularly the scholar, Race and Social Justice Focus. Gabriel Sines is the symposium editor. I think we ought to hear a special applause for Gabriel. Where are you? Right over here. And it's been interesting to me in my career to watch the way people not only who go to law school, but then serve on the journals, like the law reviews and special journals like this one, do well in life beyond, because they're not only learning the law and doing the scholarly work, but learning to manage and lead. It's not an accident that the editor of the Harvard Law Review became the first African-American president of the United States, Barack Obama, and used that credential even running for president. So who knows what might be possible for those of you in this room, but congratulations for your participation in public issues through your law career at St. Mary's. My wife, Mary Alice, is here. I want to recognize her and thank Dean Johnson for his leadership on this as well. I would like to just single out one special guest this morning who came at Mary Alice's invitation. And that is a man named Art Rodriguez, who went to high school on the south side of San Antonio, grew up on the south side, went to St. Mary's University, and then joined the farm workers movement, where he became the successor to Cesar Chavez. When Cesar Chavez passed away, Art Rodriguez became the president, a San Antonian, became the president of the United Farm Workers, on the forefront of all of the public issues, including immigration. And the farm workers have been sort of the symbol of Latino progress and protest and pioneering all of these years. Art is back in San Antonio after having retired as president, And it's a good sign that he's here this morning and signing on to the current agenda of progress for San Antonio. Art Rodriguez, would you please stand and let us recognize you? Artie Rodriguez, the United Farm Workers. Let me say just a few brief words of introduction of the subject. The first is that San Antonio has a long history with immigration. It's not exaggerating to say this city wouldn't exist in its modern form without immigration. But as Ms. Dang said so articulately, this is the classic case of that phrase where the border, we didn't cross the border crossed us. Because the border was far north of here until 1848, when it moved to the present boundaries of the United States. And San Antonio, which had been a northern outpost of Mexico, became first a part of the Republic of Texas and then a city in the United States. But we have wrestled with border issues throughout our modern existence. There was a time, as Ms. Dang said, where people crossed the border relatively easily. And I want to say a moment about that. It wasn't exactly an open border, but very, very close. But in the modern era, we have been participants, recipients, if you will, of programs like the Bracero program, and we have been in the forefront of efforts to create a more humane, workable immigration policy. Through the various iterations in the 1970s, through the 1986 Immigration Reform Act, which included a large amnesty, and more through the efforts in the 1990s and even in the early years of this century, from 2000 to 2010, particularly around 2006 through 8, major initiatives to deal with the three elements that have been widely acknowledged as the elements of immigration reform. One, more workable policies with respect to crossing the border. So border security, border sovereignty, that whole range of questions that are legitimate legal questions, because all nations in the world have a right to have a border and then to have that border mean something. So it defines national sovereignty to say this is our geographic space, and we set policy for what happens within that space and how people enter it. So that subject is a sensitive one, it's a legitimate one, it's an important one. Clearly we're on the wrong side now of how we're dealing with it as a nation, but it's point one about immigration reform. A second is the, quote, legalization of people who are here in a presently undocumented status. About 12 million people or so, we believe. And the significance of that is that it's people are living in the shadows that are not properly documented. We know it is not going to be possible to deport 12 million people. So a mature approach is to say, well, how do we legalize? How do we create some structure in which people who are here undocumented can be legalized so they work in the open, so they shop, so they are safe under the law, etc. Very serious set of questions. And of course, they are the nub of some of the hottest issues in America today, because people call what we once called a legalization strategy as an outright amnesty. And it is not intended to be. It's intended to be the beginning of a process which leads to the third element of immigration reform, which is a path to citizenship. People who are here for a number of years, have met sort of legalization criteria, would then have the right to become full-fledged citizens of the United States. Those measures that I was talking about in the 2006 timeframe, where senators like Senator Kennedy, Ted Kennedy, and John McCain, both of whom have since passed, were leading the way on a national initiative that would have created a path to citizenship, rigorous, included language instruction, understanding American laws, etc., and long, in some cases up to 15 years to get citizenship, but a process nonetheless. That isn't even on the table today at all. So from those discussions in the early years of the century to now, the last 10 years or so, the conversation has changed completely. 9/11 played a role. Legend has it, and I believe it to be true, that literally in the days before 9/11, days like the day before, President Fox of Mexico was here, and he and President Bush had agreed on a strategy that included these elements, and were right on the verge of saying they would each champion it in their respective countries when 9/11 came and changed the conversation, because now people began to be worried about the nature of immigrants. And that has only gotten worse in the present circumstances. I don't have to tell you, Ms. Tran Dang did a good job on her chart of describing the subjects that dominate the conversation today. A wall which separates two nations, which have traditionally had extensive commerce between them. We even call the region not Laredo, not Nuevo Laredo, but Los Dos Laredos, as we do at other points along the 2,000-mile border that we have, from Brownsville through the Texas cities to El Paso at the halfway point, on into New Mexico, Arizona, Calexico, and eventually San Diego, Juarez on the other side. And today that whole dynamic has changed. The wall is the focus of discussion. Larger deportations. We saw last September on the first day of school, children came home in places like Mississippi and Alabama to an empty house because their parents had been taken away that very day on the first day of school. A tragic and sad set of events. You saw her reference to DACA and the end of DACA. Mary Alice and I have personal experience with DACA students who now are endangered. That is to say, young people who have been here all of their lives, have no connection, literally not one relative in Mexico, who would be sent back to Mexico even though they came at 4 years of age with their parents. Of course, the family separation issue, which is the most obscene of the policy matters we have seen in recent years. Family separations, taking children from their parents, putting them into a system where even the computer loses where they have been sent. We had hundreds, if not thousands, of children somewhere in the United States which their parents could not identify and find because of the way the United States government handled it. From pens and cages to transportation across the country separated from their parents. A court system to handle the asylum requests, which was not adequate to the task. And then, of course, things like the shooting in El Paso, which these other things that I have mentioned so sharpened people's sensibilities that a young man loaded weapons in a car in Dallas and drove to El Paso knowing that there he could find plenty of people to shoot in public places, because in a city like El Paso on the border, he had a very good chance of finding Latinos to kill by just spraying bullets into a Walmart store. So this is the climate that we're living in today, and it's appropriate then that St. Mary's would take the intellectual leadership of bringing us together. Let me just say one final point of a closing of how this is, kind of personal for many of us, and certainly for me. Personal in the sense that we've dealt personally with DACA students. Personal in the sense that the people that we live with, work with. Mary Alice and I live on the west side, and she's the president of a nonprofit we have. And we work with children from the neighborhood schools, and their parents are undocumented. And we teach English and citizenship, so we know their life circumstances. But it also goes back to our family circumstances. My mother came at 2 years of age across the border. My grandfather had been active in the revolution in Mexico as a printer. In those days, the printer was important because there was no radio and there was no television for campaigning and such. And one day, my uncle went to his print shop and said, "Papa, you need to leave because they're waiting for you at the bridge on your way home and you're to be executed." So he did the smart thing that someone would do in that circumstance. He went the opposite direction to the train station, boarded a train, and arrived in San Antonio with 29 cents. He worked at La Prensa because he was a printer. He became a printer at the San Antonio Spanish language newspaper and eventually established his own print shop. 6 months later, he sent for the family. My grandmother, who had been the headmistress of a school and had a reputation for being a very tough lady, when a cavalry troop of Mexican federal soldiers came to the school for young women with the intent of burning the school and assaulting the young women, she went out into the courtyard and stood in front of the commander and said, "Aquí no, you're not going to do this. You say you're for the well-being of the people in this revolution. Why would you do what's about to happen?" And he backed off. When she got to the border with the children, my mother and three brothers, when they got to the border, the procedure was that the children would have to have their head scrubbed with kerosene to make sure they didn't have lice. And my grandmother said, "You're not going to do that to my children." So she backed away from the border, went back into the city, and went to a barber and had all of the children, including my mother, a little girl, shaved bald. We have a photograph of that day. 4 completely bald children, so that there would be no reason to scrub their heads with kerosene as they crossed the border. So there's a lot of stories that one could tell about family, but clearly many in San Antonio are vitally interested in this subject of immigration. Let me ask the panelists to please come forward. President Dr. Suhaib Haq, who is the president of El Badi Community Health Clinic. Please, doctor, the stairway is over here. Please, let's recognize Dr. Haq, who runs one of San Antonio's very few, if not the only, truly, completely free health clinic addressing immigrants. Please have a seat, sir. The Reverend Ann Helmke, who is the City of San Antonio's liaison to the faith-based community, a civic position serving to bring churches together with the civic issues before our city. Please come forward. And Dr. Pedro Martinez, the superintendent of the San Antonio Independent School District, who is doing an outstanding job in turning around a school district. He has responsibility for 49,000 students in the San Antonio School District, and if you follow the news, you see that performance levels are up and capital improvements are underway and innovation in handling new approaches to education. So let's start the conversation today, if we may, with Dr. Martinez. Doctor, would you share with this group the context of immigration as you work with it? Talk about the way immigration manifests itself in your responsibilities as the superintendent of the city's core school district, if you would, please.
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's an honor for me to be with you. I myself am an immigrant, actually. I was born in Mexico in Aguascalientes. My parents came to this country when I was turning 6 in the 70s. And so this work is very personal for me. What we're seeing in our schools right now is, first of all, a large percentage of my children are either themselves DACA students, their parents, they might be citizens here, but their parents are not born here, or may even have other relatives, even if their parents are born here, that are also dealing with the same issues. And what's amazing is, and I'll share this one story, I won't reveal her name, but we have this one student whose mom actually recently got arrested. Let me tell you first about the student first. This is a young lady who, her whole dream has always been to be an engineer. We got her a full ride scholarship to the most prestigious engineering university in the world, 1 out of 10, and she got that. And the reason she came under my radar, because we have about 2,600 grads, is that she was, her mom didn't want to let her go. And so I deal with these issues all the time. So I said, okay, is it a cultural issue? You know, is the fact that, you know, she'd be leaving San Antonio, she's worried about how she's gonna, you know, deal with going to that part of the country. And what I found out later was that her mom was undocumented. So she, you know, she basically said, I don't know how I would get in touch with her if something happened to her. I can't get on a plane. How would I get there? And then fast forward a couple weeks later, as fate would have it, she gets arrested for deportation.
The mother.
The mother did, because the daughter is actually a U.S. citizen. And so we immediately scrambled. And I'll tell you, we had already 3 backup plans. She has 3 brothers, very, very high poverty family, by the way. And so we had a backup plan. We found the relative to in case the mother was deported, to take in the brothers. My principal was ready to take in our student. And so that's how far we're going with this, and it's very personal for us. What we're doing now is we're making sure, first of all, that our children don't lose hope, because that's the biggest challenge right now. They have this amazing ability, they have this amazing potential, and we know that it's complicated right now, especially on the legal side. We're not experts. We're bringing in partners, by the way. So we bring in organizations that this is their expertise. We train their counselors. We train teachers that on a voluntary basis that also are dealing with these issues firsthand. And so for us, I mean, it's just an example for you of how personal this is in our district.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Doctor. And let me just say, it's 10:14 by my watch, and this session goes to 11:15. So what I'd like to do is maybe go about a half an hour with the panelists, and then we'll open the floor for questions, because I'm sure you have questions, and that can be the richest part, I think, of the dialogue. Dr. Haq, obviously education is a key function, and Dr. Martinez has spoken to that interface, but health, obviously, right at the heart. Maybe not every single day, but health issues confront families. First of all, could you say a word about your clinic, which I have described as one of the very few free community health clinics, and then also the nature of the cases you confront and how immigration bears on it, immigration status?
Well, good morning, everyone, and I would like to thank St. Mary's and the Scholar, and especially Gabriel, to giving me this opportunity to represent El Barri Community Health Center.
Where are you, by the way? Where is El Barri?
So the clinic is located off I-10 and Desawala area.
Right.
And as a background, I'm a family physician. I'm board certified in family medicine and sleep medicine. And we started El Barri Community Health Center about 6 years ago. And at that time, we thought the healthcare reform is going to fix everybody's healthcare need. But we saw still gaping holes, so we said, okay, there are a lot of people that need help, and let's start a clinic, a free clinic for people who don't have insurance and cannot pay for their care. So El Barri is a free clinic, 100% volunteer-run clinic. There is no charge for anyone. Just like regular clinic, we see family medicine, primary care patient population. We treat diabetes, blood pressure, cholesterol, arthritis. We have...
How do you fund the clinic, Doctor?
So it's all donation-based. Luckily, since it's a 100% volunteer-run clinic, there is no, administration. Paycheck. Nobody gets a paycheck. The space is provided by the Muslim Children Education Center. That's the mosque on the northwest side of town. So they're providing the space and utilities, so we don't have that expense. So we have a, very minimal
low overhead.
Low overhead for office supplies, those kind of stuff. And there are amazing, generous donors in the community, and across San Antonio, we get these. And checks can't be anonymous, but people that we have never, seen or met, and we get that in the mail that they're trying to support the clinic.
So talk about the immigration aspect of this. What can you tell? Obviously, you don't ask about immigration status as you receive patients, but what can you tell about their status and how it impacts their inability to access other health care?
So being an immigrant myself, when I came here about 20 years ago, I finished medical school at that time in Pakistan, and my parents have already immigrated, so I came as another piece of luggage with them, because at that time it was a foreign medical graduate is basically useless unless you do all the prerequisite and the exams that's needed to get the U.S. medical license. Anyway, so my family and I went through a lot of issues with health-related challenges. And that gave me the opportunity to be up close and see what an uninsured immigrant goes through. And luckily, I was from a middle-class family, so I had some support, but looking at the people around me in the same situation who were worse off really opened my eyes to the challenges that they have to go through every day. And also at the same time, it gave me the opportunity to look into how our healthcare system works and what are the opportunities there that we can improve. So immigration is, we are a country of immigrants, but everybody comes in with a different story and medically a different challenge. When we look at the barriers the title of immigrant brings to you in terms of healthcare is, number one, if you are undocumented. And the undocumented patient we see, their biggest fear is getting caught. When they try to, basically they avoid seeing medical help because of this fear. Okay, I'm gonna go somewhere, somebody's gonna ask for my ID or social security number, and maybe 10 years ago it was not as scary, but nowadays it's very scary.
So you see them in a more advanced state of health deterioration than they otherwise would if they had
Exactly.
confidence and went earlier.
Exactly. So it is, they keep ignoring, and at the end of when they show up, it's either too late or they are causing to increase the burden of illness in our community.
And when you have someone with a serious condition that requires something more than you can do in the clinic, you provide primary care, I
Yes,
presume.
yes.
So someone with an appendix that needs removal,
Right.
What do you do?
So, I mean, we are blessed that we have, county resources available, university health system. Of course, if it's an emergency, they're not going to deny any care to anybody. So we have that. We have a bunch of specialists that volunteer with us, and patient needs heart procedure, patient need some joint procedures, surgeries, we tend to refer to them. We tap into a lot of community resources and grants. Like we have had patients who, female come and, they have a breast mass and it turned out to be a cancer. So we work with mostly University Health System and their resources to get these patients placed into the right clinical settings.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll come back to you in just a moment. Reverend Helmke, tell us about your responsibilities as a City of San Antonio liaison to the faith community. It is not a position that I have had in my time, so I don't know how it operates. Tell us about it, and also where immigration fits in your spectrum of concerns in this job.
So first of all, I also want to thank Gabriel and St. Mary's, but I have to tell you I'm a little awestruck up on this stage to be with these folks. And I'm also nervous to be in a room of over 200 attorneys. In a former life, I was married to one and it didn't end well. So,
Well, attorneys can be contentious.
yes, they can. But I'm still, I've got to tell you, I'm still stuck at your grandmother. And
Pull the mic up a little bit.
And I'd like to just take a moment and invite us into a moment of silence for those who have suffered because of these things and those who are living in fear every day. I'm still stuck there. So if we could just take a moment, I'd appreciate that. Because we are better people than this, right? Better people. I'm also curious, just curious, if there's anyone in this room who isn't an immigrant or a descendant of an immigrant. I want to know. There is one back there.
They would have to
There
be.
are two.
They would have to be Native American.
That's what I'm talking about. So to the people who have shared their land and welcomed us, I also offer gratitude and ask for forgiveness for also. We could spend all day here, couldn't we? So my role as the faith liaison with the city, which is still fairly new. I've only been doing this for 3 years, and I'm the first one. There are only about 6 of us across the United States. Our roles are different depending on how those were written and shaped by the city that they serve in. One of the things that I have found out while serving in this position, and Henry, you might know this, but all our federal departments have a faith liaison, and it's not new. So there are folks in DC who work at that intersection between faith and society. And
Who appoints you, the mayor or the city manager?
I'm hired by the city manager
Okay.
and serve in the Department of Human Services.
Got it.
That's not resources like personnel, it's human services. So Head Start, senior services, tax preparation help, all those things fall within the department that I serve in. And I think it's quite brilliant that it does.
How did they define your mission
My mission.
in the job?
Right, is to, along with Human Services, the same mission, to improve the lives of families and communities that are most vulnerable and most in need. That is done through collaboration and activating partnerships and networks between the faith community, governmental agencies, nonprofits, businesses, it's no small task, businesses, and community groups, neighborhood associations, congregations, that if we were working together
Right.
in the services that we do have for humans in this space, we would be more efficient at it, more effective at it, if we were doing those things together.
Now, we have a strong history in San Antonio of faith-based services, like the Battered Women's Shelter started as a faith-based effort, the SAM Ministries for Homeless started as a faith-based effort, and many others, literacy, many others. Though you have a special interface with those who are faith-originated,
Yes,
organized?
the organizations, but also the 1,400 congregations that we have in the city. Because many folks in the city don't realize the services that are offered, much like the clinic, but the services that are offered within congregations.
Catholic charities through the
Well,
Catholic
even just
churches.
within the congregations,
Okay.
food pantries, AA groups.
Got it.
Things that are happening right there.
Right.
And the larger we grow, the more important it's going to be that we're working in proximity so that people don't have to, say, go to Haven for Hope or across town for services.
I've heard
So
of
right there.
congregations that feed the homeless every day. They have volunteers who come and prepare a meal for the homeless every single day out of their church.
Yeah, I know of one Presbyterian church on the southeast side of town. They got an award last year from the food bank, but they serve, their congregation worships like less than 50. But they serve 6,000 families every year.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So-
that's not, they're not unique. There are others who do that as well. So immigration.
Let's bridge to immigration. How do you see immigration from your vantage point, and then how does it fit into this service question?
So my cohort in crime is here. He's walking out the room right when I'm going to say something. But there are 2 liaisons in the city. The other one is the immigration liaison, and Tano is way at the back of the room. And we work 2 doors down from each other. So immigration doesn't fall directly under my roles and responsibilities, but we work in partnership and in that networking of the collaborative work that I do in congregations. So we work together in that. But I think, especially with the topic that we have, that ethical role, where it really connects, is that, I don't know if all of you know this, but we are officially a compassionate city and partnered with 450 other global cities in doing compassion work based on the ethic of reciprocity. And this is where immigration does connect with my work. And that ethic is pretty simple. It's not easy to carry out, but it's simple to treat others the way we wish to be treated ourselves, and likewise not to treat others in ways we wish not to be treated, right?
So let me ask you, as you, from your vantage point, you have an unusually good look at the traumas in our city, those who are underserved, those who are suffering. There are homeless people, there are disabled people, there are frail elderly people, there's many, many categories. Where do you put immigration in that spectrum from what you see on a daily basis?
I don't know if there are categories. I mean, that's a part of who we are.
Yeah.
It's as much our work, and maybe more so in some cases, but in terms of categories, it fits right into everything else.
Yeah.
And the whole migrant surge that we had last year, I think it's interesting because when the city kind of stepped up and into that, the statement that was said is, we're going to do this. We're going to welcome people in because we would want to be welcomed. We're going to feed people because we would want to be fed, and we'd want our children fed, all that ethic of reciprocity. But the thing that was said by our leaders when they decided to do it, they said, it's just the right thing to do. You know, like, isn't it interesting when we get to that ethic that we know that's right?
Yeah,
Like all these other conversations become so
yeah.
crazy making.
Yeah. So, Dr. Martinez, let me come back to you. If you, as superintendent, again, doing a magnificent job of creating a progressive school district responding to our children, could write, the order for what you need to serve this particular agenda of students, what would that be? What do you need? What can you do with resources you have, and what else do you need?
Recently, I had the honor to testify actually in Congress. It was my first time testifying. It was interesting. As an educational leader, I would have thought it would have been education as my first testimony, and actually was on immigration. And the reason why I testified, and it was Congressman Castro had invited me, along with actually other Congress leaders around the country. And one of the things that I shared was, first of all, the rhetoric that's out there is just so scary to our students and to our families. And so,
This is what they're hearing on television, or what is
hearing
directed at them as students, as individuals?
Actually, what they hear just in the media.
In the media.
Whether it's social media, some of our national leaders when they speak negatively about our immigrants. And really, that costs no money. That is just, can we change the rhetoric? Look, there are laws, and one of the things I'll tell you about my immigrant students is that, they're working. They're not trying to get any, government benefits, or they literally are trying to just find good work, take care of their families. My students, they have dreams like every other student, and they work, they're working towards it, including my young lady who just got into this top university, and they're looking for a shot. So that costs no money. What we are doing, and we are redistributing resources in our district, is, for example, we developed a newcomer center. We have, just in the last 3 years alone, well over 500 children that we're getting now from, many times these are children that were detained, and they're now in our district. And so we said, we got to be smarter about how we serve them, because, for example, many times they don't have, documentation in terms of what their education was, whether they're coming from El Salvador, Honduras, a few from Mexico, but a lot of them are from Central America. And so what we're doing now is, for example, this fall, at one of my top dual language schools, Tran School, Urban Academy, wonderful school if you ever get a chance to visit it on the west side, we're setting up the Newcomer Center. And at the Newcomer Center, we welcome the families. We give a diagnostic to the children. That school serves pre-K to 8th grade, so we have the gamut so we can serve all the children. And so right now, and so we are really mobilizing our services specifically. And by the way, we use the Newcomer Center for English language learners. So, we have over 20% of our children are English language learners. We have the fastest growing dual language program in the country. We went from 2 campuses now to 50 out of almost 100 campuses, and not stopping. By the way we do dual language here, it's very fitting for San Antonio. It's around culture. We have the unique asset that the majority of my children have a Mexican descent. So it's not a coincidence that all my middle schools, all my high schools have folklorico, have mariachi. The mariachi programs are now starting to be known across the country because they're now competing at that level. And we bring pride. And by the way, in many cases, including Mayor, maybe when you grew up, these were the parents of these children weren't allowed to speak Spanish.
Sure.
They weren't allowed to celebrate their culture. So for us, it's just fascinating that I've been doing this work for 5 years. This has been a big part of our strategy, and we saw last year the largest achievement gains of any of the districts in Texas here in San Antonio, because we're tapping into our pride and identity. And so for us, now as we're receiving these immigrants from Central America, for us it's just, the resources really, the challenges, and this is where we have to partner with organizations. So for example, the legal support.
Right.
Huge. These families can't afford legal support.
Right.
We need specialists that do that. We're now starting to partner with the medical community.
That is a huge issue.
Huge. It's I would say it's the number one issue that I can't provide directly.
Pause on that and talk about that. But I know from our experience in the neighborhood, people need good legal help.
Yes.
And there's not exactly a directory full of people that you could trust who are going to provide them good service. People will be overcharged. They'll find their paperwork on a stack that tall, which the lawyer just forgets to work it. There's just not a conscientious attack on it. Just see that over and over. We have a very, very difficult time referring people to good legal services. Just talk about that, because this is the right audience to bring that problem forward.
One of the things that I would love is, a great set of resources, whether it's a directory that is credible, that really, we really could, really work with. And like I said, we already work with nonprofits, including Maldov now. But again, the problem is a lot of these organizations are so overtaxed now. And so for us, I would say that would be the number one thing that I would like, because I feel for my families who really, they're just looking for guidance. It's not clear out there.
That's a great idea for this group. For St. Mary's, I mean, there could be one substantive thing that comes out of a conference like this, which is some kind of a resource center where even law students volunteer to provide some level of initial assistance, because there just isn't enough.
And again, as a district, we've made the decision, this is really coming from my board, that again, we are going to, the good news is we are required by law to educate all children, and that's the great thing about this country. We also protect their privacy. That's a great thing about our country, including my own police force. We honor these children, and so for us, we are a good vehicle to create really an area of safety, of confidence. For example, I have a dream summit every year for all my high school students, where these are children that, even though they don't tell us directly, but, are undocumented. And so we do that, and every year it's hundreds and hundreds of students we bring together, and we also on a separate night bring their parents, and it's about information from everything from health. Of course, scholarships is the number one thing, because we want them to continue to push their academics to go to college. But so again, Mayor, I mean, I think, as a district, we're trying to be a model district and opening our doors to partner with the community around this very complicated issue. But I would say, like I said, getting services, starting with legal, we're starting to partner with health, are probably the top issues for my families.
Great, thank you. Dr. Hawk, can you just describe the practical medical symptoms that you see related to immigration? In other words, when people come to you who are undocumented, you may not know they're undocumented, but is there a more or less standard list of things that you see that either undernourished or suffering from particular sicknesses, or what do you see as a practical matter?
So most of the patients that we get do come with a symptom. They may usually say, okay, I have high blood pressure or diabetes or arthritis. Chronic pain is the most common symptom we say. They come with headaches or backaches, but that's just the key to open the door.
Do you see a lot of children?
Our clinic doesn't see children. We're only limited to adults.
Got it.
because of the state requirements for immunization, monitoring, and management, we don't have the resources.
And even though your origins were in a mosque, do you, as a practical matter, see all ethnic groups?
Yes, actually, if we look at the demographics of our patients, I think on a daily basis, 20% are Muslim and 80% are non-Muslim. So, and we see people from all ethnic backgrounds in our clinic. The clinic has been there for 6 years, so it's getting some name and traction, and we're getting, different ethnic group of patients.
Would you ever envision locating in some of the more underserved areas than where you are in the Northwest Side? Although more and more immigrants are on the Northwest Side because they want to be closer to where the work is.
So actually, when we started the clinic, we looked at the demographics and we looked at the zip code, and we saw that the area around I-10 and Isabella, there were a lot of working poor living over there.
Right.
So we thought maybe this
Although
would be...
housing is probably hard for them to find.
Exactly. And coming back to the first question, the symptoms they come with, I mean, being, having gone through what an immigrant goes through, most of our providers, we seek the symptoms that are underlying what the patient present with. So once we start talking and the patient becomes comfortable, and the key that we have is the dignity and compassion. Without that, there is no outcome in health. So we really try to relate to them, and then they start to open up is that what's underlying is depression and a lot of anxiety that is not on the patient's radar. They think their headache and their back pain is because of they're working too hard or whatever they may think. But digging deeper, we find these things that are affecting them without them knowing and have long-term negative health impact on them.
Do you believe there is a correlation between being and living an immigrant life, particularly in the shadows, outside the law, and those kinds of depressions and physical manifestations?
Exactly. The fear of unknown leads to anxiety and depression, and these lead to other chronic healthcare issues that affect them for the rest of their life. First, the immigrant come, their first agenda is to, okay, how do I get food on the table? The second is that, how do I get a roof on my head? And the third and most important agenda for most of the immigrants is to get their kids to college. And, luckily that is taken care of in most part, by the city, by the school districts. But, and the health is usually ignored till the last when things are falling apart. And so our clinic is there, so we remove the barriers of financial eligibility, we remove the barriers of some time constraint because we run it on Saturday and Sunday. So majority of the people are off, or they have somebody to drive them to the clinic, or they have somebody to take care of the kids while they come to us.
Thank you. Reverend Helmke, let me ask you a kind of a question related to religion, philosophy, if you will. When Professor Granardo did the invocation, it was a beautiful selection of biblical quotations about our obligations to the sojourner, the person on the move, the person recently arrived, the guest. And as a practical level, it's easy to pray about that, but it's hard to execute because you don't know these people and you don't know their backgrounds and you don't know their character, et cetera. So just talk to us a little bit about the spiritual dimension of how we ought to think about immigrants as people who need help.
I think I'd rather go the other direction. If you think that the execution is difficult, I would say it's the easier part than praying, from my perspective. And I'm sorry I missed that prayer, but the sojourner, the stranger, it comes right back to, seeing other people the way you wish to be seen. It's, in one sense, as a human being, our obligation. And to take that into action, I was thinking about what I heard Pedro said was that a directory. So I'm going to take what he said and hear that almost like a prayer. I heard Pedro say, we need some sort of directory. You said that, right? Mm-hmm. So that is a voiced prayer, practical spirituality. And frankly, that's all I'm really interested in, is what do we do with our feet and our hands on the ground? How do we move that? So you hear a direct need, and that need isn't always, that need that I heard Pedro say, isn't just for immigrants, and it's not just legal aid. We have a very practical thing that came out of that same prayer. When the initiative started, this faith-based initiative, we asked all those thousands who were surveyed, if we're going to help those who are most vulnerable and in need, whether they be homeless or immigrants, children, foster care, public health, mental health, whatever that might be, we asked the community, what is the number one need that you have to make those things happen so that we can help? And their response was technology. We need a directory where people can get their hands on what they need. That's a prayer. It's practical spirituality. And so I want to tell you, you asked what the initiative does, but we developed the largest, most comprehensive San Antonio Community Resource Directory that is a wiki model and available to everybody in this room and everybody in the 1.5 million out there.
Great idea.
And there's a whole section here called legal. I looked it up. Adoption and foster care, advocacy and legal aid, citizenship and immigration, identification recovery, tax preparation, tenant rights, and translation. That is a action that's tangible. It took a little bit to develop the platform, especially when you have no budget, but we did it. And that is a practical example of answering prayer.
All right, let's go to the questions. And I don't know what your process is for taking questions. Do you want to just take mics to people? Or do you have cards written or what, Gabriel?
If you have a card, please raise it in the air, and our editor-in-chief and executive managing editor will
Okay,
pick them
Gabriel,
up.
while that process is occurring, would you hand the mic to Tran, please, who was the previous speaker? I would love to hear her. She runs a center in Houston which focuses on some of these questions. What your reaction is to what you heard from these panelists? Does it sound like the things you're dealing with? And how would you assess this conversation?
Well, I'm actually based in Guadalajara. The organization is founded in Houston.
Got it.
And so I'm extremely impressed with all of your work. And it's interesting for me to hear, because I work on the other side of the border, kind of how cities are tackling these questions here, and particularly with the school superintendent, kind of the level at which you're caring for your clients. To me, that's really spectacular.
Does anybody, I had in my notes a couple of things that I wanted to bring up that are just hot button questions. One of them is sanctuary cities. Does anybody up here have any thought at all? It's a hot subject about how we ought to approach this subject of sanctuary cities. Is it something sort of best left in the area of doing the best we can and executing and not taking on as a hot question because it obviously energizes the other side? Do you have any thoughts at all? Anybody?
The only thing I would say about sanctuary cities is one of the things that we're very sensitive in terms of me and my team, my board, is we're very strong advocates, of course, for our immigrant students, and we're strong advocates really for all of our students because we have one of the highest poverty rates in the state, in my district. And despite that, like I said, we're having significant success with our children. And one of the things that I do see, Mayor, is that there's been times, literally, where there's been a loud advocacy for pro-sanctuary cities, and I've seen literally like raids come in.
Yeah.
Like they literally come in. I mean, we've seen it in Austin, we've seen it here, and so I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
It's a frustration more than anything that I fear for our families, and that's why again it goes back to it doesn't cost anything. I think all of us have to figure out how to change the rhetoric out there, because the anti-immigrant rhetoric that's out there, what people don't realize, our children are more connected to social media than ever before. than any other generation. And they're very conscious, responsible individuals, whether they're in elementary school or in high school. And they hear these things and, they take those to heart. I mean, it's almost attacking them directly or their family directly. And so I don't know what the answer is, but that's one thing I think that, again, doesn't cost any money. We have to figure out how to change that conversation that's happening.
Okay. Questions?
Yes, our first question is directed to all the panelists. What are the best ways for immigration legal service organizations to partner with your organizations to keep the people you serve, give concerns? So just what's the best way that they can
Okay,
partner
let's just
with
go
your
quickly,
organization?
a couple of sentences from each panelist. What are the best ways that legal services organizations can be of service to the concerns you have?
So I think the easiest way, I have a chief of staff, her name is Tiffany Grant. She, tgrant@sisd.net, and or you can call my office and ask for her directly. She is connecting all of our partners, and she connects directly with our academic department that's headed by Dr. Olivia Hernandez, specifically around around dual language and around migrant services. And so for us, we're bringing these partners in so that we can connect them to our schools.
Okay, so there's a place to plug in and a need.
If you're not listed on sacrd.org, sacred.org, and you can look, if you're not, get your information there. And secondly, go see Tino, he's right at the back, raise your hand, and he'll get you connected.
Okay, and Tino, your responsibilities are immigration within the city,
He's the
the way we
immigration
relate
liaison.
to immigration as a city.
Yeah, I'm the city's immigration liaison. I work for the city manager's office, and anything that has to do with immigration, questions that come to the city.
We have a microphone coming your way,
He works for the city manager's office.
right?
Anything that's happened with
In the
immigration.
manager's office?
Oh, he works down the hall
Yeah.
from me, but he's
I mean, officially, I'm in the
manager's
manager's office. It's a
Got it.
inside baseball thing, but
Yep.
sure. Ann and I work very closely together. We have since I became the immigration liaison 2 years ago, and a lot of the issues that you all have been discussing about the availability and the networks of services that are out there, we've tried to address those too, and primarily the same way, using the same model that Ann has brought to the city, which is collaborative work and having people talk to one another and decide how we can best address the needs of our community by pooling resources, by making referrals one to the other, by sharing that information. So a lot of the information that is out there, we found out the same as Ann did when she asked congregations. What is the number one thing that people need? They need to know what everyone else is doing. So it is really important for you all to share with each other. This is what I know about this resource. This is a thing that I do. And it's basically that same kind of networking that happens in these kind of rooms, but for our community.
Got it. Dr. Hawk, a
yes.
relationship between legal services and available to you, how would they plug in?
They can always, we have a table down over there. Our cards are there. You can reach us through our website, Facebook, phone, fax, and they get directed to me or the other in-charge physicians.
And that actually might actually be a mutual benefit. That is to say, not only could they provide legal services for someone that you determine needs it, but they may have people who come to them as lawyers who are in need of health services.
Exactly.
And there's a free clinic.
And probably, they come to seek the legal help before they come to see the medical. So we will definitely like to partner and get a setup going. But yeah, the information is over here at the table, and you can always, call me.
Can I see the hands quickly of those of you who are presently lawyers? Can I see the hands of those already in legal service? Wonderful. What a great attendance. And how many of you are working in immigration law? Can I see the hands of those? About half of the number that put your hand up before or so. And how many of you are law students? Can I see the hands of those? Okay. And how many of those of you who are law students have some interest in immigration-related law? Okay, so the bulk of you who are present. Okay, I suppose that's logical considering this is a symposium on immigration, but thank you for your interest in the subject. We need top-flight services and help. Questions? Further questions?
The next question is directed
have a
to
question?
Dr. Hawk.
This lady right here. Comment.
If you could write it down in a card, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next question is directed to Dr. Haq. Are mental health services available at El Bari? And if so, how accessible are they?
So most of our physicians are primary care doctor, and we are trained in screening for depression, anxiety, and mental health disorders. So most of the patients do come through the clinic are screened for depression and anxiety. That's a standard practice across all the good primary care clinics. And we have two physicians who are primary care doctors who are very passionate in counseling and taking care of the patient who have more mental care need. We also have a psychiatrist on board. That those patients who we see are advanced, we get his help to come and see the patient at the clinic. And yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. We have a question from the media, Express News. And I guess we could open this question up to other
Sure.
panelists. Trump's administration public charge took effect this week. How will this affect SAISD or El Bari Health Clinic or the city of SA? Are any changes in operation in San Antonio to provide additional services in regards to this new policy?
Gabriel, maybe someone in the audience could describe the policy so everybody is up to speed on precisely what is the policy question.
Is the media member here?
This latest,
Tino?
anybody?
It's basically the public charge. So in other words, if a migrant who is applying for some kind of a relief, who's applying for some kind of relief, if they are seen as a public charge, that is seen as something that could prevent them from seeking that relief.
Correct.
So in other words, how will this affect SAISD, El Bari, and San Antonio doing anything to mitigate that?
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have probably the easiest part only because, the laws we follow are really clear. We educate every single child.
And you don't ask.
We don't ask. Their privacy is protected. And really, and we're lucky to be in a city of like San Antonio, who's very supportive of our immigrant families. So even if there's a suspicion that this family may wind up needing uninsured care, for example, those things. Again, for us, the good news is we just opened up a clinic on the west side that is for any student of SAISD, whether they are documented or not. Just opened up at the FOIA, actually. We just had the ground with University Health, and Dr. Haq was there with us, and at the ribbon cutting, we're about to open one on the east side at Davis Middle School. And so for us, we're taking our charges again, and it's our mission. We are serving every child. We're looking at what their needs are. We're finding those partners, and we're going to ground ourselves on not only on our laws, but also, again, our duties to make sure these children are successful.
All right. So the public charge issue is not an issue for you because you don't ask in the first place, right? Others, comments?
So the public charge issue, when it pertains to El Bari, it doesn't affect us because we don't take any fund or grants or any money from any government organization. So that doesn't apply. But I go through these stories every day. Just day before yesterday, we had a patient, the labs were abnormal. And we were trying to call the patient, so check on the patient, see if he or she is doing okay, and we couldn't get hold of the patient. So the policy says that in this situation, we have to dispatch non-emergency police to do a welfare check. So I told my nurse, we need to get hold of this patient, and we need to dispatch for welfare check the police officer. And my nurse's jaw drops and I pop out and she says, "But doctor, this patient is undocumented." She would not like police to go to her house and do this. Anyways, the other is that we see.
So what did you do?
I mean, this was a medical emergency. We had to send the police there.
You did?
Everything turned out okay. Luckily, San Antonio is still a compassionate city from the heart, and people really want to take care of each other.
So they found her, they brought
found
her
her,
in.
she was good, everything turned out okay. We referred her to the next level of medical care that she needed. But that happens, probably 100 times, 1,000 times every day throughout the clinics in San Antonio.
Dr. Helmke, did you have something you wanted to add on this question?
Well, I was just going to say, it doesn't, at least in human services, it doesn't change anything.
Yeah, got it. Okay, next question.
Today we heard about what new arrivals need, but not what our city gets from them or how it benefits from them. How can we change that narrative?
So, I think it's a great question, and I think that's really what I'm trying to get at about us changing the narrative. We know that there's been studies, for example, the Latino Policy Forum did a study, the University of Notre Dame did a study back in Chicago about the economic investment. This is more than a decade ago, the economic
Impact.
the results that our immigrant community gave in Chicago, and it was, just a large percentage of the economy there. I think those are the kind of things that I think we have to do together, is remind people that, one of the reasons this country is one of the most prosperous, it still is the most prosperous in the world, regardless of what's happening today, is that it's because it's our immigrant community. They provide a labor force that is consistent, that helps our economy continue to expand, and they pay more into the economy than they get out of it.
Let me ask a question of all of you on this point. It seems to me, this is just purely anecdotal, and I apologize if it sort of draws any lines that shouldn't be drawn, but from what I have seen, the human motivation involved in having spent the human energy to come here somehow awakens in people a real desire to work, to strive, to achieve. And I can see differences between some who are newer arrivals and how they perform in our society. It may be a kind of natural selection that you have to have a lot of gumption, you have to have a lot of nerve, you have to have a lot of courage to come here in the first place. Relocate, the journey, the danger. So we're getting the elite from a kind of a courage standpoint of the population. It's a select group. But then when they do get here, they really work hard. And I've seen that kind of disproportionately among the DACA students and among others. Is that just my imagination, or is there anything to that?
I think, we see this in the field of medicine, and in El Barri, we have had a number of volunteers that help at the clinic, were immigrant, and now they are finishing medical school or residencies. They had a tough time transitioning into the US system, but they persevered, and they are getting to the point where they're saying, okay, Dr. Huck, we're the next you. So give us a couple of years, we're gonna, So I think immigrants are the most, I would say, are the human capital and the investment for our society. Because they bring that, energy and that a lot of people who are in their day-to-day routine may not have. So instead of invest with them and work with them, if we are, looking the other way, we're probably, not doing the smartest thing.
If you look at in education in Texas, the districts on the border,
Yep.
like Brownsville, Far San Juan, many of these districts actually outperform the state and even the country. And these are very high poverty districts, and these are mostly immigrant families, which, by the way, for them, children going back and forth on the border, it's just like an everyday. It's been going on since probably the 20s and 30s, if not before that. Yeah. And they have always had a history of just very high performance. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the qualities of our immigrant children, again, and the parents, again, they come and they contribute a lot more than they ever get.
I'd like to say something, could I?
Yeah.
Because I think how we change the narrative is that we be the narrative. And I think what's happening, I know what's happening in San Antonio, is that our narrative is different. And I mean that in a very good way. Mm-hmm. That I know through all the partnering that's happened through Tino's and my work and the community and the faith community working with the city and the city working with nonprofits, we're changing the narrative. And probably, you mentioned the human capital. Yes, people need legal care. Yes, people need health care. Most importantly, they need other people. And that's one of the most amazing things that's happening in San Antonio are the people who are companioning and being with people and providing safe spaces and sanctuary, which has spiritual roots in that term. But, you know, to come in and to be the narrative and to change the language ourselves and how we, so to speak with others the way we wish to be spoken to listen, to be with. So we are changing the narrative. We're a different narrative. I grew up in Illinois. I just visited my 96-year-old mother. The narrative there is different.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. There is something special in this city. Let me ask a question of the audience along the lines of the earlier questions. How many of you, either lawyers or law students, are yourselves immigrants, born outside the country? Wow, that's a big part of this audience. And how many of you, given your interest in immigration, believe that it is in part derived from your immigrant history personally? Can I see, would you please stand, those of you who would answer yes to that question? Yeah. So this is, these folks are in it, not just out of some general sense of compassion or even profession, but because they want to give back along the experience track that they themselves have had. That's very impressive. Do we have time for another question or two?
Yes, this question is directed to Superintendent Martinez. Does the district have a plan in place if a mass deportation of parents takes place in San Antonio, like the one in Mississippi last summer?
So we're, you know, right now, the challenge, this is why we're seeking partnerships. So our plan really has been, we're cementing partnerships, and we're asking the partners to do the things we can't do, which is to give the proper guidance to families about the things to, you know, to know their rights, to know how to handle situations, to have backups. I mean, sadly, right, backups in case something happens to an adult that gets deported. Every week, by the way, I get reports of children that this has happened to, where their parents, one or both, have gotten deported. And so we're tracking that. One of the things that we make sure is that these children still have stability in terms of their education. I had an example of a young lady who got arrested last year for a very small, you know, shoplifting, but because of that, got into was an undocumented student, was held in a detention center. It was a week before she was going to get her diploma. I made sure that she got her diploma and then we still helped her with legal support. But I mean, again, so for us, I mean, the plan really is, and the goal is just to continue to grow the partnership. And again, we're lucky to be in a city that supports that.
That sounds like a very, very good idea, though, because it is highly possible that we will see deportations, targeted mass deportations occur, and the children do get left out. And if there's not relatives nearby that are sort of connected already, it would seem that it would be useful in San Antonio to have a cadre of people who could step in and open their homes and create foster environments and so forth while the parent situation is being resolved. Sounds like something we ought to be thinking about as a community. Another question.
This next question is directed again at Dr. Hack. How can your patients who are undocumented access prescription medicine?
So, okay. So like any regular, you know, clinic, primary care PCP clinic, we prescribe medications for whatever the illness the patient present with. And we usually send the prescription to Walmart, where they have the $4 prescriptions. We also see if the patient is able to pay for that. If not, we have some Walmart gift cards, $5 gift cards. So we tell them, hey, you know, your prescription is already in the pharmacy. Take this gift card, get your medication, get a loaf of bread for the $1 that's left. So we have that backup built in.
The implication in the question, it seemed to me, was that there is some barrier, legal, like you need your driver's license identification or something to get a prescription. Is that the case or not?
I think the pharmacy doesn't ask for, unless it's a controlled prescription or something, but for most of the prescription, they just need name and date of birth and some address or phone number to verify as a tertiary identifier.
Got it.
So, yeah, we haven't run into any issue with those at hand.
Okay, got it. Yes, sir.
No further questions, but we do have two comments.
Okay?
The first one is from Alicia Perez. We have an organization called SA Stands, which is a coalition working on local policy issues. So anyone who wants to address local issues, this is a great place to connect and organize. Again, that is SA Stands.
On immigration, focused on immigration, is that correct? SA Stands?
I believe immigration
Yes.
in addition to local policy issues.
Got it. Okay, good comment.
And the second one is we change policy through voting, so make sure to get out there and vote. And if I may add something to that,
Elections have consequences.
the scholar is very proud to have a voter registration table here today. So if you haven't updated your information, we're here to help you.
Okay, let me ask one final question of the audience. Please raise your hands if you have learned a fact or an insight from these three people that is useful to you in your work. I think you got a unanimous endorsement, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to Dr. Suhaib Haq, Reverend Ann Helmke, and Dr. Pedro Martinez. Thank you very much to the panel.